Okie doke. Any other questions before we move on? Everybody got it? All right. I am going to hit the big reclaim host button here. So just give me a second here to make me the king. Okay. So Shirley said it really well. I've been doing this for about 10 years now, and it always surprises me that I'm still the dumbest person in my class when I teach robotics. So the kids will always come up with better solutions than you. I was joking with her earlier before all of you joined that, you know, it's really the first generation of children to come out of their mother knowing how to use an iPad. It's pretty incredible. I had my first computer when I was 20 years old. So these children have a natural advantage. The solutions that I'll be demonstrating are just a solution. So we do provide an answer key. Even at Robot Mesh, there's about a half dozen of us who work there, and all 6 of us came up with 6 different ways of doing it. So don't get hung up on the correct way to do it as per the book. It's just a way that you can demonstrate the functionality if you're stuck. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go into a screen share, and I'll just talk a little bit of kind of a high-level objective here. So I think it's the case that you guys can all see what looks like a Google Keep note. And this is just kind of a rough agenda for today. I'm going to discuss the learning materials, what comes with the kit when you get it, some simple tips to get you started, just some kind of common sense stuff. We'll take a look at the building instructions for the robot and discuss building the robot. I recognize a lot of you do not have the robot, but there's really nothing to be scared of here. It's essentially a Lego robot. It's pretty easy to assemble. And then we'll take a look at the software, and we'll go through 2 of the exercises together as a team. So let me share a different screen here. Let's do this. So if Shirley can help me just a little bit, is it the case that you can see something called Catapult Robotics Kit Getting Started Guide?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. So let's talk about what comes in the kit. You're going to get a big tub of robotics parts. I think if I change screens here, you can see what this tub looks like. Shirley, I think it's the case you can see this picture I'm showing you. Or she's muted, maybe. But essentially what will happen here is what you'll get is you'll get a tub of parts. It comes with a tray. You'll get a Chromebook, and you'll get some documentation that accompanies the robot and the computer. Essentially, one of those pieces of documentation is this Getting Started Guide. It is basically all of the common sense things that you can forget when you have a lot on your mind. The biggest and most importantly is to always make sure that you have your robot and Chromebook charged. A good time to do that is to do that overnight so that it's ready for you the next day, next morning, next afternoon, whenever. It's very hard to teach a robotics program with a dead battery. It's happened to me lots of times in the excitement of getting ready. So this Getting Started Guide is one of the documents. It's just going to show you how to turn on the Chromebook, where to find the software icons, and it's going to introduce some of the hardware components. And we'll be looking at this in greater detail a little later on, but it shows you how to connect the computer that drives the robot into the Chromebook. So I won't belabor that point. It's pretty straightforward. The second thing you're going to see is you're going to get a bunch of build instructions. Let's just see. These are my build instructions. So the teacher's guide, which we will soon take a look at, tells you what steps to follow. I'm just going to go through some handy parts of this guide just to draw your attention to some of the more important things. So for most of the course here, there are many robots you can build using the kit, or template robots you can build using the kit. Primarily, we're going to be interested in this one, standard driving base, which is just looks like kind of like a little RC car, which is in steps 1 through 19. And in later exercises, we start introducing sensors. So there's going to be, we're going to add those sensors. And so we'll find the instructions for that here under autopilot instructions and build steps 102 to 117. On the very next page is some useful tips on how to move stuck pieces in and out. In general, the pieces snap together sort of like Lego. There's just plastic ends that connect into other bits that have holes. Occasionally, you may find that some of the pieces are hard to remove with your fingers, especially if you have small hands. And so there's just this second page here just goes through some tips for how to work the pieces in and out if you're having trouble. I've been doing this a long time and I've never had to go through any of these steps, but I also have big goalie's mitts for hands. And so I'm usually the person people ask if they need a jar opened, but that may not be your situation. As I mentioned, in the documentation that comes with the kit, there is a link to the generic building instructions for all of these robots. So if you happen to finish with the workshop as planned, all of these kits, you can see it says build instructions, build instructions, build instructions. You can build all of these robots from the box you're provided. So you have quite a bit of variety. And each of these robots comes with its own coding suggestions. We won't go into them today. I'm just showing you that this is a resource that will exist in your box. And there should be a link to this page if you need more activities to do. I'm going to come back to the building instructions and I'll just talk about some of the things that are going on in here. So as we can see, essentially it's a Lego robot, although it's not called a Lego robot. There's plastic holes and then plastic connector pins that are holding the construction together. Each step, so we have step 1, 2, 3, tells you the pieces you're going to need from the kit. In some cases, so if we look at this example, I'm going to make this a little bigger so you can see it. Over here, we have a metal beam, and there's lots of metal beams in the kit. So you might wonder how it is that you can find the correct metal beam. And so over here, it says 4XP. What that's telling you is that this beam is a 4-hole pitch long, meaning that if I were to take this metal axle and line it up against one of these plastic parts, the metal axle should be about 4 holes in length, right? So that gives you an idea of how long this is. I'm going to show you in a little bit one of the posters that comes with the kit that will help you map the correct parts to the build. But while we're here, other things I can show you, just scroll down a little bit, is, let's see, there's one other thing that's interesting here. There's another example here. This is a plastic black axle. It says 2XP. So we would expect this to be quite a bit smaller than the 6XP. This is 6 holes long. If we lay it against one of these beams, this is 2. I'm going to go to the next piece of the puzzle. So you'll get these building instructions here, which eventually, once you get to step, that's a little too far. Let's go a little further back. Let's go make sure I got the right spot. Here we go. So step 19 is essentially the robot you're going to build. A useful way of knowing that you've reached your destination is you'll get these checkered flags. So now what it's telling you here is that because you've built this robot, you have a driving base that will allow you to build either this robot at step 20. So this would be the next set of instructions. See, it says Clawbot IQ2, or to build the autopilot, which is actually the robot we're going to be using for the ladder exercises with the sensors. Each of the robots comes with essentially a game controller, which we'll see in a couple of minutes, a robot brain, and a number of sensors and motors, which we'll also soon see. These parts all use telephone cables, or what look like telephone cables, to connect from the various peripheral devices. In this diagram, it's showing you a motor that's connected, and it's showing you the numbers here tell you the ports you're going to connect. So what happens, and we don't see it in this diagram, but when I flip to show you the real robot in a minute, each of these ports has a number. I believe it goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So 1 to 6. And then it goes from 7 to 12 on the other side. And so it will tell you usually what size of cable to use. So here we see the type of cable. It says 200 millimeters. Again, I'll show you a neat trick for finding the right size cable. And it will show you the port to plug the peripheral device into. The exercises assume that you have followed this construction, that you're using these ports with these peripheral devices. If you are not committed to using our solution set and you'd rather the kids just experiment, they can use any size of cable and they can use any kind of port. It's just that the solution set won't run on their robot because we have assumed that you are building it as the instructions tell you. So it just means that if you're running into problems, you may want to make sure that the ports in the software, which we'll take a look at, match the physical wiring of the robot. I will just hang out here for a couple of seconds and stop screen sharing just to see if anyone has any questions before I talk about the other documents that are in this kit. So give me a second here. Are there any questions about what I just showed you with the instructions?
So typically, and obviously sessions are going to vary everywhere. So in your estimation, how many hours does one complete project take? Is there an estimated time frame?
Yep. So that is a great segue to what I'm about to show you next, which is the teacher's manual. So the lessons are roughly designed to be done in 60 minutes. If you're really in a smaller group, you might do it in 45. If you're in a really larger group, you're going to move a little bit slower. You might need 2 classes. In my experience teaching these in 1 hour increments, you lose the first 10 minutes at the beginning and the end as people clean up and sort parts. So a very important kind of pro tip here is depending on how many kids you have in your class, each kit, each box that you will receive, each kit has everything you need to do the program. Kids will often want to share parts with each other and say, oh, if you're not using that, let me take that. And you'll want to fight the temptation to let them share parts. It creates stress and heartache down the road. Everything, all those robots, and there's quite a few of them. I showed you like a dozen robots you can build. You can all do from one box. So everybody has what they need. The second thing I'm going to show you here on camera is I'm going to show you what the robot actually looks like and talk about some of the parts. So earlier I mentioned that inside of the box we'll find a charger, very important. The charger is your friend, very hard to teach robotics without a charged battery. You will find a robot battery inside it. Very simple battery, just slides into the charger. It's pretty just like using your phone. And it will be red in a charging state. The green light will turn green when it's fully charged. And it's very common when we do these workshops live that we will have all of the kits charging overnight. And usually what I do is I have the charger sit on top of the robot case. So everybody keeps their charger, their hardware, their Chromebook together as a unit. And if it helps to use stickies or some kind of way of demarking who's who. The other thing each of the kits has is the kits themselves will come with colored pieces. So the robot by default is blue and gray. If you buy it from the store, that's how you get it. We've added custom colored bits. So you can see that my robot is pink. It may be the case that if you have 3 or 4 kits in your class, you'll have a pink robot, a red robot, a green robot, a yellow robot, so on and so forth. The color adds personality, but it also more importantly allows you a way of differentiating whose kit belongs to who. So when we do the workshops, we have team green, team red, team blue, so on and so forth. I just dropped it here. The robot comes with a game controller. And a very important thing that'll be hard to see here is you can see there's a little blue nub on the controller. And there's also a little blue nub here on the robot. So this blue nub is the radio. It's what allows the controller to talk to the robot. And the controllers out of the box should be paired with the robot. So it should just magically work. We have a staff member who's checking to make sure that the kits go out with everything properly configured. Do not trade controllers with each other. If you trade controllers, then whoever gets my controller, it will not be paired to their robot. They'll have problems and stress. If though, because it has happened before and people are known to do their own thing and not listen, inside of the kit, if I find it here, there is a really fat looking telephone cable, like what you would have in your cable modem. And if you cannot connect to the controller to the robot for whatever reason, you'll turn the controller on, you'll turn the robot on. So just to turn the controller on, there's a big black center button. I'll turn it on. There's a green light that lets me know that in this case it's on. If you're having connection issues, this light might be flashing or might be red. It might be a color other than the solid green. I can take my big fat cable that came in the box, plug it into the cable jack here at the top. So here I'll put it in so you can see it goes in. On the robot side, there's also a big cable jack. The robot will be turned on, so we'll talk about how to turn on the robot and navigate in a second here. But what we see here is we have a check mark and an X. Excuse me. This is your on and off button, and then you'll use the 2 directional arrows to move through the menu. So to turn the robot on, you're not going to be able to see the display because my screen's too bright, but I'm going to hit this check mark to turn it on. It helps if the battery's in it. So if you're turning it on and nothing's happening, you should check to make sure you have a battery. So what I will do here is I'll take my battery. It will just slide into the back underneath into the undercarriage of the robot. So this will take me a second here while I slide it in. It snaps. It makes a pretty distinctive sound when it's in. So I'm just going to push it in. Okay. I will turn the robot on using this check mark button, and what will happen is the robot will whistle to let you know that it's on. You might have heard that little whir, it makes a little sound. So now the robot's on, the game controller's on, and what we see here is the game controller light is blinking, meaning that it's talking to the robot, and the way I can tell is on the robot, see how the green light on the robot's also blinking. On this screen, which you cannot see, and which we'll see in a PowerPoint in a second, there's a diagram that will tell you your connection status. This robot is already paired, but again, we were talking about the situation where if we have a robot and a controller that are not talking to each other, I take the cable from the controller, plug it into the jack here on the robot, and just let it sit there for 2 or 3 seconds. And that's usually all the time it needs to pair the 2 devices. And then you can take it out and you can remove it from the controller and you're set. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to go into a screen share to show you the what the display looks like, just because it was obviously very hard to see that. And then we'll just stop for questions again. So let's go back to my desktop. And let's just see if I find the right screen here. Okay, here we are. So it should be the case, again, Shirley will just help me out, that you guys can see what looks like a computer with a series of numbered ports, 1 through 6 on the top, 7 through 12 on the bottom. Is that the case, Shirley?
Yes.
Okay. So this is going to be easier for us to read as a group. So again, the check mark is your on button. You can also think of the check mark as like the enter button on your keyboard. To select any of the commands on the screen, you'll hit the check mark once. To cancel out of any of the commands on the screen, you'll press the X once. If you press down on the X button repeatedly, you will turn the robot off. So if you press it X, I think it's like 2 or 3 times, it will shut down. The robot is also programmed to shut down after being inactive for like, I think 15 minutes just to save your battery. So if it may be the case then the time that you're teaching, if your robot's on, it might go off. So let's just take a look at what this looks like. So it's showing you the check marks, the directional arrows. And this is the screen I wanted to show you. Is you'll get this little Wi-Fi set of bars. And what that's telling you is that's telling you when these bars are present, it's telling you that the brick is connected to the game controller. It should be the case that out of the box, all of the robots and all of the controllers are connected and you do not have to worry about this. But this is your fail safe if, for whatever reason, you're not able to get the controller to talk to the robot. We also see here your level of the percentage level of battery you have. And beyond that, it's a pretty simple computer. What other things this kit comes with is it comes with student workbooks. So I'll just show you what one of those look like. There's 2 flavors of this course. There's an elementary course and an intermediate course designed for older students. I happen to be showing you lessons from the intermediate lessons. So here what we'll see is, as Shirley pointed out in her demonstration, the title of the unit. This is the student workbook. So again, some of these mindfulness lists about the engineering process, things to consider. And then there's just a daily log. A lot of the lessons conclude with students diarizing their thoughts or their experiments on the different lessons. So this is just a workbook for the kids. And in some cases here, if there's a sample program they had to run, a solution set may be provided at the end of the document. So in this particular lesson, there was a program that they were to run, and if they weren't able to get it, the code is given to them again. The code also exists in the software as a finished version, which we'll look at in a few minutes. So that's the student workbook. The teacher workbook, just to spend some time in here, again, looks kind of similar to start off with. We have the subject, we have the unit, we have the different lessons. Again, each of these lessons takes about 60 minutes to do if you're timing it. There'll be a mapping of the different educational criteria, learning outcomes. The first couple of pages are just telling you the themes you'll cover as they map to different educational standards here. These are Common Core state standards. I'm going to skip ahead here to the beginning. So this is the very first lesson here. It's called Begin Your Robot. It tells you, again, the materials you'll need to have on hand. You'll need the robot. You'll need your Chromebook. There's some posters I'm going to show you in a second. And then almost all of these lessons start off with a discussion. So there's some things that you as the instructor can ask your students to start thinking about what is a robot. And it's interesting, right? Because different people have different definitions of what a robot is. Some people will say a robot is just an electronic device you can program, which makes it interesting, right? Like is your microwave oven then a robot? Is an elevator a robot? Are these cars that can drive themselves robots, right? So, or does a robot have to look human? Or does a robot have to be programmable? Is it a robot if you drive it using a remote control, right? So what is a robot? So we start off here with a conversation. And then basically what happens in this part is the instructor then introduces the different hardware components, which I'm going to go through in a couple of minutes. And it tells them here on the instructions that you're going to need. So if I look for it here somewhere, it says basically to do steps 1 through 19, somewhere in this document. My eyes are failing me. And it gives you a rough timeline. It takes about 30 minutes to build the robot. So you'll go through those steps and wind up with the robot. Here we saw step 19 was the magic last step. And then we get the students to diarize their experience. It says also here, if the students finished earlier, there were additional steps that would allow them to plug sensors into, so they could do that as an activity that tied them over. So we then have this may be a case where you need more time than 30 or 40 minutes. So this lesson happens to spill over to give you additional time to think about, what is a robot? How should it behave? What properties does it have? And to add the additional sensors if you need them. Again, instructions tell you where in the robot instructions to go. So steps 102 to 115, which we saw are the little blue numbers here in the corner. And then we'll get to this part in a second here. We'll talk about our first programming exercise, which is driving a robot. What I will do here before I show the remaining documents that I want to get through, which is the classroom posters, is just hang out here for a second. I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that we can see each other. And just say, is there anything that we saw in the lesson guide, the student guide, or the robot build instructions that we want to talk about while we're here? Keep in mind you're muted. Yeah.
Kristen, apologies if you mentioned this earlier, but so if one session takes about 60 minutes to build, does that mean at the end of that first session, if they've completed the robot, do they have to disassemble the robot and start over for session 2, or you continue building upon your base? You keep continuing on your base. So once the robot's built, it's built. When you're completely done the workshop, you will disassemble the robot, and then there will be, I believe, a FedEx mailing label that will allow you to send the kit back to us so we can refurbish it. We have about 50 kits. They go out. We check them before they go out so that you have everything's paired. All the parts are there. Chromebook works, all that stuff. You use it. There'll be a FedEx label in there. When you're done with it, you'll put it back in the box and keep it. Some of the kits will be brand new, as in like they'll still have stuff in their original plastic wrapping. And the question comes up, should I keep the wrapping?
the short answer is that the wrapping is like one of the first things to go missing. So if you have the original wrapping, the person after you appreciates it, but we don't expect to see it back. It's like Christmas Day. People are excited. They rip through the packaging like a ravenous wolf, and then it goes missing. So if you lose the original plastic wrapping, don't throw out the tray. The tray is super useful. But I think you'll find some of the smaller bits come like in little Ziploc bags and stuff like that. If those go missing, they go missing. Our team that refurbishes the kits will look after that. But the expectation here is that each lesson is cumulative and builds on the previous lesson. So do not rebuild the robot each time.
Got it.
And I also just wanted to add to that, even though we say in theory that each of the sessions should be taking about 60 minutes, sometimes it takes a little bit longer. It's also possible that it might take less time. It's more likely that it'll take a little bit longer, just especially if you're in a group of students with different ability levels, different levels of experience and expertise. And that's okay. I think that's really where it's imperative that as a teacher or as a group of teachers, you kind of plan ahead and figure out, like, this is what we're going to be able to go through this week based on where your students are at. And that's okay. I think you can go as slowly as you need to ensure that your students are having a dynamic experience. So don't feel beholden to that 60-minute per session rule.
Any other questions before I move on to the other documents that come with the kit? Okay. So one of the more useful things that you get in the box, and it took me a while before I really appreciated how beautiful this thing really is, but a lot of the kits will come with a poster. I'm going to step back so you can see it. And it's basically a parts poster. And what's cool about this poster is you saw in the building instructions how sometimes it will tell you to use a certain length piece, right? So how do you know if it's the correct length? And so what we can do here, and I'm just going to fold this up a little bit so we can take a look at an example, is say, for example, it's asking me to use a certain length piece. I can go find the piece that I think is the correct piece. And this is a one-to-one drawing. So I can go and take this and I can match it. You see how it fits perfectly? And so what you'll frequently see in the instructions is there'll be a part number. It's going to be really hard to see here, but there's like a little serial number. A lot of times in the instructions, it will show you a piece which you may not figure out which the correct length. There'll be a part number. And when I teach this course live, I take this poster up to the wall, and it's just a resource. If the kids are building, they walk up with their part, they match it. You may also notice that there's different diagrams for the cables. And so what we can also do here is you can take one of the cables, and if you bend it, like this cable, it should, when it's extended and bent out, it should fit the underlying diagram. So this is super useful. These do get lost or people forget to pack them. So if you only saved one thing from the kit other than the kit itself of the documents, this one, whoever gets this kit after you will really appreciate having this diagram, and it makes building a lot easier and more collaborative, right? So kids can walk and talk to each other and try that out. So that will be in your box. The goal of this program, if you get through all the lessons, if time permits, is you will eventually program a robot to play in a robot sumo battle. So the idea here is you'll have another poster, and this poster is a robot sumo ring. And so this is taking a second. I lost my audio. Okay, now I'm back, I think. So what we see in the Sumo map here is the robots will use their sensors to keep themselves in the ring. Basically, the idea of Sumo is just like in real life, the robot wants to stay in the ring and push its opponent out. So it will use the color sensor to detect the white boundary, right, to keep itself from leaving the ring. And it will use a distance sensor to detect the presence of another robot. What we see in the mat is there's hash marks, and that represents the starting positions for the robots. It's very common when you're doing the robots, so this is going to be a little tricky for me to do, but the robots typically start back to back. So in a robot sumo challenge, when you're ready to fight, the robots will drive out. The first thing they'll have to do is to detect the presence of the ring boundary so they do not leave the ring. They'll find it, they'll turn around, and then they'll start looking for whoever they're going up against. And this is just a foldable mat. It works best on, you know, on a large enough table. If you happen to lose the field mat for whatever reason, you can easily create a new Sumo ring with essentially white poster paper and a black marker. You just need a way of creating contrast between the ring boundary and the playing surface so the sensor can detect the difference. You can also use black electrical tape to create like a square ring for them to do battle in. But all of those lessons, as we mentioned, are cumulative, are designed so that the robot becomes more and more sophisticated. You're adding sensors to it, and you're programming it with the end goal of it being able to play in that competition if you get far enough. There's one last poster in there, which I do not have with me, unfortunately. It's the Blockley poster. So just as I showed you that robot parts poster, the Blockley poster, which is the programming language we're going to be using, it shows all the commands that are available to you. And we'll see when we get into the software that the commands are largely organized by functionality. So all the sensors related to motor movement are in one place, all the blocks related to loops and decision making are in a different place. And so those are your documents. You get the robot kit, the Chromebook, the teacher's guide, the student guide. You'll get a getting started guide from us, which shows you how to connect all those things. You'll get a poster, which has all the parts map, which I suggest taping to the front of the class. You'll get the Sumo ring, and you'll get another poster from us, which shows you all of the available programming commands, which is just another classroom reference. Before going further, I'll just hang out here because I went through a lot of things really quickly and see if there's any questions. I see there's some things here in the chat room, so if Shirley saw anything interesting here in chat, then you can also intervene.
Yes, no, I think folks are just really excited about the Sumo, which is always my favorite part of the activities, and also, you know, when we do them during trainings. But a couple of questions came up about, you know, just how much are we integrating competition in each of the sessions? And so I was saying that, you know, ultimately we're working up for each of the lessons, we're working up to some sort of a larger activity, whether it be a basketball game or the wrestling or something else. And so I don't know if you want to talk more about that, but. Sure,
yeah. The idea about Sumo is a really, I never get tired of Sumo, and I've been doing it for a decade, and kids certainly never get tired of it. It's fascinating watching boys and girls play Sumo. So when boys play, there are winners and there are losers, and you do not want to be the loser, right? So I've had it where, like, the boys go up to the other kit that lost and they get to destroy the robot as like their bounty or their reward for doing it. Girls, much nicer, much more collaborative and interesting, right? So for my own personal entertainment, the gender differences in play between different groups of students is always interesting. The way the lessons are structured, and I think there's like 10 of them. I don't have all the lessons in front of me, but they're designed, each lesson is designed to expose a new piece of functionality. So lesson 1 is, let's build a robot, right? We need a robot. Lesson 2 is, could we make it move using the game controller, right? Some kids just like driving. Not everybody likes programming, and that's okay. Lesson 3 starts talking about, now that we know how to make the robot move using the game controller, can we make it move on its own autonomously, and what's involved with that? And then we get into lessons about how to make the robot turn, how to use sensors on the robot so it pulls in information from its environment, and ultimately how do you make decisions, right? So now that the robot's taking in information from its world, how can it synthesize that information into a plan of action? What's beautiful about Sumo is it uses all of those things. Some students might only just want to play using the game controller, very common, and there's no law that says you have to program the robot. The programming just represents a place you can get to. Other students really enjoy the programming, and the Sumo activity brings movement together. It brings sensors, so it uses 2 different types of sensors. It brings decision making, so the robot has to decide, is it in the ring, is it out of the ring? It has to navigate, it has to locate the other robot, and once it thinks it's found the other robot, it needs to have an attack strategy to try pushing it out. So another thing that we typically see is that once the kids have a working base bot going and they have it programmed to do those 2 or 3 simple things, then they typically go back and they customize the robot. They add more doodads, onto it to give them some kind of physical advantage. Maybe the robot will have a big shovel, or maybe it will have a grabber and a motor thing. You can start doing those things. So some kids who really like the building aspect more than the programming part will want to grab the robot and start adding onto it. That's okay too. But again, if you get to Sumo and you want to do it, it's awesome. People never get tired of it. And it's actually a very, the programming for it is very simple. It's about like 12 lines of code, but it looks pretty magical when you see it. So you'll be like, wow, I didn't think I could program a robot to do Sumo. And it's about 40 minutes worth of work once you have all the parts going. Other questions about the kit contents that I just went through? No? Okay, going once, going twice, going thrice. Okay, so let's move on and talk about other things here. So give me a second here.